All right, let's get going. Hi, everyone. My name is Connor. This is TV Pilot Bootcamp Week 2 for Script Camp. So this is going to be all about taking that idea now that you've refined the basics of it and outlining out the broad strokes of what are the actual order of events going to be in your pilot episode. So let's look at... Oops, sorry. My webcam is actually falling down. Here it is. Whoop. Let's take a look at what we are going to be doing today. And here's a quick refresher, of course. If you're just joining us on stream, what is Script Camp? Obviously, we are a Discord community, but we are focused on taking you from idea to finished draft in many different classes, free classes, events and workshops, and some paid classes like VIP member classes, boot camps, and writers' labs on Saturdays. Here's a little about me, which I went over in the last week's class, so you can review that on YouTube or on one of our previous streams if you haven't seen it, on Twitch as well. So let's look at what is this boot camp. Remember, we're going from idea to first draft of a pilot in just 6 weeks using this step-by-step practical method featuring these 2-hour interactive live weekly classes. We have a program for 8 weeks for features, 6 weeks for TV, and 4 weeks for a rewrite, and 6 weeks for playwriting, which just started Saturdays from 2 to 4 Pacific time. So last week was all about concept and logline and just refining down what is the very basic core of the idea and how to express that idea in just one single, concrete, compact sentence. And also, we were working on filling out the sketchbooks, which are sort of an unorganized collage of all the ideas that you have for the project, including lines of dialogue, characters, ideas for locations, or rules of your specific world, or anything else that you just need to get down before you can start organizing that into the shape of a story. So that's what this week is about. It's more about organizing what you have and what you've been working on in the past week into the shape of a story, because there's a difference between just a bunch of unconnected events and a story. Is the difference between those things is structure, and the structure is what allows you to take an event and say, so then the next event happens, and so then the next event happens. It's not and also then the other thing happens. So it's what takes structure is what connects events and turns just occurrences into a story. So we'll work on the story beats summary today, which is going to be a rougher and kind of bird's-eye view outline of the entire pilot episode. Next week is about scene cards, which are a full paragraph for every scene in the entire pilot before you get started. So you should nail down exactly what happens on every page before you even begin. That's why we spend our first 3 weeks on pre-writing, which is the process of nailing everything in place and making sure we answer all these questions and do the majority of the heavy lifting, thereby front-loading the work that you have to do so that you are not backloading the work by sort of discovery writing a rougher draft that will then act as your early outline, which works for some people, but the method that we are going to emphasize here is going to be one where you front-load that work as much as possible so that you can do, by doing that extra stuff up front, you're going to have an easier time with the pages. Week 4, first act. Week 5, second act. Week 6, third act. It's that simple. Every week you're going to be writing 10 to 20 pages, depending on the length of outline you are, or the length of script that you're doing, which does somewhat, yes, incentivize you to pick a shorter idea, so a half-hour format as opposed to an hour, simply because it's half as much work to do in what is just essentially a 3 weeks of actual writing after the pre-writing is done. So half hour, you'll always have less to do, but that doesn't mean it's automatically way easier just because you have less space. It means you actually have to be more judicious in what goes where, and like the application of that space and the use of that real estate becomes more finicky the more the shorter that it is. I mean, if the less choices you have to make, the more impactful each of those choices becomes. So let's look at the overview of the course. This is going to be a pilot in 6 weeks. Is the draft going to be good? Probably not. Our first draft's ever really good? The answer is kind of no, not really. But let's just move beyond that idea that any individual script needs to turn out good or perfect or just as you imagined it, because all that stuff is somewhat irrelevant. It's your job to write and to finish things and to build the muscles required to actually do this work, and to work in the industry requires you to untether from your ideas and to say, no one idea is so important that I have to spend longer than, 8 to 12 weeks on it. You kind of just need to start something, write it, finish it, edit it, and then move on. And you need to be producing several scripts a year I would say about 3 scripts a year. If you're intending to be a pro, if you're trying to build up to becoming a pro, at least 3 scripts a year. If you're writing half-hour pilots, I would say twice that many easily. So, again, move beyond the idea that anything needs to turn out good or exactly as you had it in your head, and you will start to approach this in a much more workman-like way. This is a job, and you need to start treating it like a job. And if you're just laying bricks, you're not going to concern yourself way too heavily over whether any one brick is a masterpiece. You have a complete road to make, and you need to get going. So, we'll start with check-in questions on the homework today, which is the sketchbook, and also just refining the logline as much as possible. I'll go over the overview of my process and get into structure and breaking down the story of just the pilot. We don't have to worry about whole season arcs or multiple episodes, or even how something will pay off in a later season or anything like that, because nobody will read beyond a pilot. And even absolute best case scenario, a pilot is bought. The rest of the show will be extensively developed with people that are not you. So all that stuff would have to change anyway. So there's absolutely no point in writing anything beyond a pilot ever. We have example story beats, and we'll look at some exercises, and of course always have lots of time for questions. Let's take a look. So, students who are here, any questions about sketchbook and loglines, and tell us about the recent TV script that you've read. Orlando, go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So, any questions or issues with the sketchbook and logline?
Well, yeah, because it's a bit different than a feature. How can you concentrate everything? I mean, I'm doing the sketchbook, but I don't know how to set the world with just that that episode. I don't know what can I leave behind?
What can you leave behind? So when you're doing the sketchbook, you don't really need to worry about like what you shouldn't include. You kind of just need to throw everything in. This would be where you might list ideas for multiple episodes, because if your story is one that could start in like multiple different places, then you just want as many ideas as possible. So for right now, you don't leave anything behind. You put everything into the sketchbook. You should start to worry about, when do I have too much, or where do I actually take this when you're getting into the structuring, which that's what we're working on this week. So just for right now, you can kind of put everything down into the sketchbook. Do you have a logline that you can link for us?
Yeah, but can I post it later? I'm from my phone and I can write right now.
Okay, yep, you can share it later in the class if you want.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, and any recent scripts that you've read?
I'm reading The Boys.
The Boys. Okay, that's a good one. Try to read at least 3 scripts every single week, 3 pro scripts every week. Take notes, probably. Be ready to discuss what you learned from each of these, what you liked and what you didn't like. These aren't like a graded quiz or anything, but you just need to be reading a lot. All right, let's look at our next slide here. So anyone who has still not finalized their series logline and pilot logline, you can share that in class, or if you're watching on a stream, go to join our Discord, and you can join this class right now. So scriptcamp.net/classes or /membership. You can sign up for a free trial, 2 weeks free for our unlimited membership, which gives you access to all of the boot camps that we do: playwriting, feature writing, TV writing, rewriting, and any future programs that we add. So you should sign up. Okay, we are not going to do the discussion questions now, but often we will ask, have you written screenplays before? What was your outlining or pre-writing process? A lot of people approach this in a lot of different ways, and some just kind of wing it and just try jumping in and just mess around and see what they can come up with. And I find that a more methodical and more rigid kind of process is always going to yield you better results and more consistent results than just kind of opening a document and starting typing. You got to be really organized with this, especially in TV, if you want to be working with rooms full of people whom you need to keep all on board as to what the story is at any given time. This, of course, applies to feature writing very heavily too. You kind of really, really need to have a rigid process when it comes to outlining, so that everyone is on the same page. If you're collaborating with other people, you don't want to have to write a whole script to express what the ideas are. You need to be able to express what those ideas are for a whole story in just 1 page, and then you can expand that to a 2 or 3 sheet, and then expand to a treatment from there. And you should be able to scale up or down the story to any size, but that is always going to start with just what we would call the story beats, which are just kind of like the broadest possible version of this. So let's look at a recap of the entire process. We start with logline, which is going to be that one sentence written expression of a premise that is going to include the main character and some obstacle that is in their way, the thing that they're trying to get, for the pilot logline at least, and get some sense of the stakes, walls, motivation, urgency, and time frame, or just the limitations, location, whatever arena the story takes place in. And then for the series logline, it can be a little bit broader and can sort of hint at the larger and overarching conflicts of the entire show. Broader mysteries that will need multiple, in theory, would need multiple seasons to resolve. Any kind of recurring episodic situation that you're setting up could be something that you would give us in the series logline without actually needing as much emphasis on what is the inciting incident that happens in this first episode. So you need to have both of those, series and pilot logline. And one is sort of more general, one is more specific, but these are both in service of suggesting a theoretical show that will not probably exist. So you're not actually going to need to follow through on any of the promises of the series logline beyond the fact that your pilot needs to feel like it is either the first chapter in that story or it is a complete beginning, middle, end representative slice of what that story would be, or one of many stories in that world. So next is a sketchbook where there's no wrong answers of things to include. You kind of just need to include all your ideas, just very scattered, like a collage almost, of pictures and video links and influences and research materials, and any just ideas you have for characters or dialogue or what the basics, elements of the story are going to be. Next, we will work on the summary, which that is what today is all about, so we have to get really deep into structure and what each of the sort of structural beats is going to be doing and how we can tailor the moments of the story in order to fulfill those crucial roles. Next, we do the scene cards, which I mentioned is a full paragraph for every single scene. Before you begin, you should know what happens on every single page. Excuse me. And then last, we will go to pages, which go to pages is a term that means you start actually writing and formatting the script properly, or start writing out what the actual dialogue is and those actual events. I smell something burning. I'm just going to check that I turned the stove off real quick. We're all good. Must be something my neighbor's cooking. You gotta just double check sometimes. Okay, so yeah, remember this term, go to pages. This is something that's used quite often, and is going to... notice that it's the last step of this process, meaning that we have to put a lot of work up front in figuring out what happens in the story before you start writing it at all. Not everyone works this way. But I find that this is it's good to learn how to work this way. It's not the only way to do it, but the fact is that just you have to be so organized and able to deliver these bird's eye views of stories before you can actually leap into writing them, especially in a TV writer's room type situation. So you can look at this little Vince Gilligan quote on structure if you want to. It's the the dialogue is the sort of cherry on top of the ice cream sundae of structure kind of thing. And that's all very true because structure is just the organization of the events in the story and the kind of bedrock of what we're doing here. It's just going to be those events and what order they occur in and how they relate to each other. It's what turns those occurrences from a list of and then events into so then events. General thoughts, remember this is your friend, not your enemy, and you shouldn't fight or wrestle with this too much until you know the expectations and kind of know how a script should feel, which means that you need to be reading a lot of professional scripts, at least 3 every single week. So this is not really a set of manacles slapped on you in order to make your pilot into trash, or Hollywood homogenized, pasteurized trash, or whatever. The structure is here to help you. It's to help you finish things, and it's to help you kind of stay on track with your own ideas so the script itself does not drift too far from its original narrative intentions. So consider by the time that you're also done with multiple rewrites, these sort of page number benchmarks, which at first glance might seem somewhat limiting, in fact, will probably be moved around a bit and will be unrecognizable or it won't be unrecognizable to someone who knows what they're looking for, but it won't feel as sort of rote and generic as you might be worried that it will. You're not locked into the structure of the outline ultimately, and a pilot does evolve organically while you're writing it, like anything. Writing is like building a train that you have to build while you're on it. So you don't have to have every single thing nailed down in place at the start. The goal is to have every single thing nailed down in place. You won't always, though. It's impossible to have thought of every single thing that's going to come up. So you have to discover some stuff just by writing the pilot. So don't way over prepare. Spend a solid 3 weeks, I would say, at the beginning, just making sure that you get all these things down, logline, story beats, scene cards, and then from there, even if you're feeling that, oh, I'm still not 100% sure how all these scenes will go, it's best to just dive in and figure it out, and this is how you build your own process and actually just get better at doing this, because these are all muscles that need to be built and maintained. This isn't just, it's not like you're looking for one amazing script that's hidden somewhere in you and you only have one. You have to become a generator of unlimited scripts and unlimited ideas in order to do this. So you got to read a lot. You really, really have to read a lot. There are other kinds of structures in the world. I get, foreign art house and things like that, but for the most part, the fact that other structures exist, or movies without structure that is clear to you, that doesn't mean that readers will be in tune with what you're trying to do, and for the most part, they will interpret your shenanigans as ignorance and dock you points accordingly. Sorry. If you have ideas that cannot possibly fit into 3-act filmic structure, writing TV in America is probably not for you. You can get away with some really weird and experimental stuff in 3-act structure, though. I totally promise I've written some very, very bizarre, whacked out, surreal things with just in 3-act structure. 3-act structure is how in the Western world we expect stories to kind of go. If you have a vastly different idea of how the story should feel and go, then you probably have to just make it yourself to prove that that works. Almost no one is going to be in tune with what you're trying to do. Recap of structure. We have, this is just the broadest possible look. Act 1 is sort of the setup. Act 2 is going to be the major confrontation, and then Act 3 is going to be the climax and resolution. So you can see that we have some additional beats that are labeled in between here, which we can go through and define, and none of this is revolutionary or original or anything that you would not be able to find in a dozen other screenwriting books or books on just writing structure in general. And that is mostly because all these things are kind of just the same names or different names for the same stuff. And it's all just trying to define what we think of as 3-act structure and give it these sort of little rules and hurdles to jump over. But it's important to kind of know what these are and how they're supposed to work, even if, for instance, in your process, eventually you're like, I like to have the catalyst really late. I like to have long first acts. It's like, okay, then you can adjust this to compensate with that. And you can, if that becomes part of your style over time, then maybe you just really like a long first act. So make sure that you know this. You have to know this before you can mess with it too much, though. It's like you can't start coloring out of the lines before you know how to color in the lines. So we're going to go through what each of these things mean and just go through an explanation of what structure looks like when it pertains to pilots today, which is going to be slightly different between half hour and hour long. And we have different act breaks. We have different lengths of different sections of those. But it's all pretty much going to follow. It's going to look like this in the broadest possible sense. Okay, so what's an act? An act in a TV show traditionally is going to be where we fade in, and then it's going to begin when we fade in, and it's going to end when we hit the commercial, right? So that's why there's a half-hour show will have these 2-act breaks, which are called plot points in kind of novelistic plotting, but we always call them act breaks. So we have Act 1, and we break into Act 2, and then we break into Act 3. So there's 2 commercial breaks there in your half-hour show, which probably pads it out from, I think a network show would be something like 24 minutes, and then we would have 2 3-minute act breaks would add up to a full 30-minute to fill out the time slot. So you got to be writing with these commercial breaks in mind, even if you're not planning on having this be a network show with commercials. You would ideally want this to be on HBO or Showtime or Netflix or something like that. It's best to still write with these act breaks really at the forefront of your thinking to show that you know how to, or to learn how to use them. And to also realize that not every act break is going to come with a commercial break, and that even these streaming shows, they still have these narrative act breaks, even if we're not fading out and going to, a Dove ad or whatever. You still need to know where those dramatically need to be punctuated, the act breaks must dramatically punctuate the story, and how it's going to break the story up into sort of like chapters, right? Even if we don't have a big chapter thing fade up on the screen, we still have sort of distinct sections of the story, so we need to know where those are going to kind of fall and how to manage those. So still do, for this course at least, write in act breaks, even if you are writing something that you think would be great on streaming or anything like that. You just never know where a show would land, and it covers your bases. It covers all your bases to have those act breaks written in there, and just it's a good skill to learn how to use. So Act 1 is like the setup, Act 2 is confrontation, Act 3 is resolution, and along the way we have the inciting incident, which is also called the catalyst. That's going to be the thing, the one event that sets your story into motion, and if anything is a coincidence in the story, it could be the inciting incident or the catalyst, which I'm going to refer to by both of those words, so don't get confused. Those are not separate things. But if, like, typically we don't want to lean too heavily on coincidence, because it feels like we want to have the main character in the driver's seat of the story who's making choices and pushing the narrative forward, which means that coincidence can feel like a bit of a cheat or an escape sometimes, or it can feel overly convenient. This word convenient, too convenient, comes up all the time in notes. The inciting incident is something that often can be a coincidence, if anything is. It doesn't have to be. So, the midpoint is obviously the direct center of the story, which in a 5-act show is more like the end of the third act break, kind of like where that's the major escalation of stakes, and it's pretty often going to be a cliffhanger in like a 5-act show. And sometimes it can feel like the sort of end of the second act is kind of like does sort of the duty of the midpoint in a half-hour show, depending on exactly how it's structured. But don't worry too much about that. We'll get into what this means very shortly. And then obviously we have the climax, which is in Act 3, and it's kind of the grand finale, the final battle in whatever way, where we resolve the conflict of the episode and your character succeeds or they fail, and then shortly afterwards we have just a little time to wrap things up and either get things, if it's a status quo based narrative, kind of get things back to where they started, or it is going to be where we can tease at what would be coming next week if this is a premise based, more longer form narrative. So there's other examples of different kinds of structures. This is a bunch of diagrams drawn by Kurt Vonnegut to illustrate kind of like just sort of fairy tale formats and just things that are not the traditional 3-act structure. So this is just to serve as counterexamples to show that this 3-act structure is not the only thing in the entire world. But I would argue that even Kisho Tenketsu, which is the Eastern storytelling model, does look a lot like what we have in 3-act. It even has the build-up and the roller coaster kind of look of the finale. I mean, it's a little different, and you should, if you're interested in these, you should study them more, but just understand that Western storytelling does not use these and probably will not even quite know what you're talking about if you reference these terms. So 3-act is what you need to learn and memorize like the back of your hand. You don't need to learn every single step in what's called the hero's journey here, which is a pretty common way of breaking down classic Western storytelling. But the beats of what we're doing do kind of map out pretty closely to this hero's journey in a lot of ways, especially this return part, which is in a status quo show going to be where you, remember, get things back to where they were before so that we understand that the game pieces will be in the same box that you left them in when we come to pick them up next week. And these are status quo based shows, are ones where it's the same setup every single week, like The Simpsons or like Law and Order or something like that. We're not always going to be moving things forward substantially. Your goal in those types of shows is to deliver more of a beginning, middle, and completely contained episodic experience that we understand every episode is going to be one of these. Here's a really confusing diagram of Save the Cat, and we are going to be using some terms that are common between Save the Cat and Hero's Journey and things, but don't worry too much about this bizarre diagram. Okay, so some common issues with structure before we get too far into it. Remember, too many characters, too many plot points, too much ground covered. So you have like a cast of a dozen plus characters in a half-hour pilot, you're going to have a problem. If your conflict is too internal and it feels like it's going to be mostly about just people sitting around and thinking about things or talking about things rather than doing stuff, it might not feel like it lends itself to evocative and exciting visual scenes. Too much or inelegant world building, so maybe your world is so complicated that it would be better fit into a series of novels, or maybe if it might just show here that the script is better suited to a different format if you have too much stuff packed into it. Remember, you're only getting a pilot, and there's no point in building out an incredibly rich and complex world because you're just only going to see half an hour to a full hour of that world. Which means that you have to put your focus on compelling characters and compelling situations and drama and emotion and all these things that we actually watch TV for. Very few people are watching for setting. People read big, thick fantasy books and sci-fi books for setting. People don't usually watch TV or movies for setting. TV much more so than movies. Like, setting is something you have a lot more just page space to explore in TV. And you can kind of explore all the implications of the ideas that you're suggesting over multiple episodes. But remember, as a pilot writer, you don't really get those extra episodes, and no one's going to read more than a pilot. So there's no point in developing a world too richly or too broadly when you need to focus on one solid hour or one solid half hour of contained entertainment within that world. So movies and pilots share a lot of DNA with short stories. They're not like series of books. So try to keep that in mind. And remember that the most common structural issue is that the story does not get going fast enough, and you don't start delivering on the early promises you've made with enough efficiency that it feels like we're actually getting what we signed up for. By the time we come back from the first commercial break, we should pretty much be seeing what was in the trailer, like at least bits and pieces of it, and sort of cutting to the essential fun of the premise that you have suggested to us. So we want to be going on the ride that you have built. So what's an outline? It's a blueprint for structuring your entire pilot that provides an overview of the story beats and scenes before you start actually putting this into regular screenplay format, which is, I say regular because there's only one way to format screenplays. Anything else will be interpreted as crazy shenanigans and not really read at all. So you have one way to format this. There's many different styles and methods within that formatting, and many different like stylistic touches you can use to build a voice and make it your own. So it's not like the format is as limiting as some people seem to think it is, but just remember that unless you're formatting this on professional script software, you are probably goofing up. We're going to focus on my practical approach to outlining in this course, which again follows this kind of step-by-step format of first you need to everything builds on the previous step. So first we have the outline, the log line, which is the one sentence that you're always going to go back to when you're wondering what is the show about, or you can look at it when you're worried that you might be drifting a little too far from your original intentions. You can always go back to the log line and say, oh, okay, this has already given me some of the tools, and I already have some of these structural pieces in place simply from looking at that log line. So you want to really spend that first week nailing down that log line as much as possible. So 30-minute pilot. This is a basic look at the structure for this. Act 1, 10 pages, Act 2, 10 pages, Act 3, 10 pages, with 2 pages for cold open at the top, and about a page for the stinger at the end, giving you about 33 to 36 pages at the absolute most. Don't go above 35 or 36, where it's going to start to not feel like a half-hour time slot anymore. And you can look at some of this is like it's not every single pilot is going to follow each of these beats exactly as far as these page breakdowns go, but this is just going to give you an idea of the kind of thing that you want to do. So like the first 5 pages or so are going to be that introduction where we meet your main character and kind of settle into the regular world that they live in. The catalyst or inciting incident comes around page 4 or 5, and that's going to be the thing that sets the story into motion. It could be a coincidence, or it could be your main character making a choice of some kind. Trying the locks refers to, you have a door in front of you with a door has been unveiled in the catalyst, which contains or is covered by many different padlocks. This is going to be the process of your character trying all the different ones, trying to open them in interesting ways as the room that they're in is getting slowly hotter, and the pressure that they are under increases so steadily that they realize that they have to make some kind of change in order. If they want to take the opportunity presented to them by this catalyst, then they need to get through this door. So the break into Act 2 is going to be about them moving through that door into this kind of new world in whatever way, making some kind of choice, getting the job, getting the assignment of the week if it's that kind of show. And that is what moves us into our premise scenes, which are going to be around pages 10 to 15. And that is going to be the stuff that we saw clips of in the trailer. And if you describe your show as about something in just a few words, it's about a guy who hunts monsters, then this is going to be the part where a guy is hunting monsters. So you want to make sure that you are delivering on those early premises that you have set up and giving us the ride that it seems like you have built. Midpoint, it can be around page 15, 16, and like sort of the end of the premise scenes, a moment that escalates pretty drastically and is going to often be the result of your character's initial couple victories, perhaps, against the problem that they're like finding the first couple clues or whatever it is that they're trying to solve. And then we escalate. So your kind of bad guys are going to regroup and try to move back in and attack the hero with everything they've got until we hit a big cliffhanger at the end of Act 2. Often it's a big cliffhanger because, remember, you have to be managing the attention of your audience carefully. It's a lot to ask someone to sit through an entire commercial break and wait until it's over and come back and continue watching when they can flip to anything they want. They have their phone, they have Netflix, they have a million options. So it's a lot to ask, and you need to give us a good reason to come back after these act breaks, meaning that you have to hit these really hard. And it's probably one of the biggest things I see in student work is pilots that do not compel me to return after the act break. So you need to be making sure that we end these acts on some kind of interesting reveal or a big question or something that leaves us hanging and says, oh, I've got to see how that plays out. So Act 3, we are moving towards what is called the all is lost moment, which is often where it seems like your character is going to either fail at their goal or be on the verge of failing at their goal. The pit of despair is when things get actually even worse, if we can look at the all is lost moment as this is as bad as your character thought things could get, then the pit of despair is going to be this is how bad things can actually get, until we break into the finale, and which is that's going to be the final confrontation. Often your character will be armed with something they've learned over the course of this episode, or some small change, because remember, TV is more about characters' gradual change. So your character can have learned or realized or gained something over the course of this episode that only because of the story we have seen so far, they're able to take sort of one last swing at the villain or whatever the problem is, and they either solve the problem or they don't. But regardless, we need to end this show with either a stinger is going to be just sort of it can be during the credits or after the credits. Often it's during the credits with sitcoms, and it's just kind of like an additional funny scene. You've given us characters that we want to spend time with and hang out with, so here's them doing one more gag before we go. You don't have to, if it's a status quo based show, you don't have to suggest what's coming next week, because we understand the implicit promise is it's going to be another story like this, like the one we just saw. If this is going to be a premise-based show, then the stinger is going to be used as often a preview for what's coming next. So a suggestion of how the bad guy isn't really gone, or how the next bad guy is coming up, or what the next problem is going to be. So that's a really basic overview of structure. We can get more into those individual beats after this. Excuse me. All right, so that cold open intro catalyst, trying the locks, break into 2, premise scenes, midpoint, escalation, all is lost, pit of despair, break into 3, finale, and then stinger, which is kind of like an epilogue. You can look at it like that. This is what you need to put onto your story beats document. If you've not already made that document, now is the time. You can start this on your sketchbook and just kind of start dragging things in from your sketchbook as needed. If you had ideas for what the scenes would actually be, you can start putting those into the order that they would go in. And this is like the essential first step of outlining, and one of the first essential steps in writing anything is just organizing the events into a logical sequence. So I would start doing that now if you've not already done that. 60-page pilot or up to 65-ish pages is going to be the same sorts of beats, but spread out just a little bit differently. Note that the midpoint is more like the cliffhanger at the end of Act 3 here. Some TV pilots that I've seen they're kind of marked out as 4 acts, but they consider Act 1 to be like it'll start with just cold open, and then it'll go right into what is essentially Act 1, but then after that it'll be like Act 1, so it's labeled as 4, but even though it's really kind of 5. So think of this more as 5 acts of 12 pages each. Act 1, 12 pages. Act 2, 3, 4, 5, all 12 pages with, again, a little space at the beginning. 3 pages-ish for cold open, 2 pages-ish for the stinger at the end, that are going to have those same sort of functions, where we are going to be... The cold open is going to be often an introduction to the problem of the week. So it can involve your main character, and it doesn't have to, but if this is a premise show, it often will. It could be them getting involved in the situation, or it could be something that helps. It's like the first domino toppling that is going to topple the rest of the dominoes of the story. Or if this is going to be a thing of the week kind of show, like imagine a crime of the week, often the cold open will be that crime happening. Like a CSI type show will have a murder occur in the first 3 pages, and then we go to the main titles, and then we understand that after we come back, we're going to meet the detectives who are going to go and try to solve that crime. So a cold open can be used for a couple different things. Almost every show has some kind of cold open. You don't absolutely have to write one if you just want to launch into the meat of Act 1, but it's all good. Okay, and just note that we've just sort of scaled out the page benchmarks from the 30-minute show. And made it a little bit broader, so we have we have more room and more space to do each of these things. So we have about 6 pages to spend on the intro instead. Catalyst is pages, between 7 to 10. Sometimes the catalyst is like the end of Act 1 in some pilots. So the meat of it though is going to be I keep saying the meat. The meat of it is going to be the premise scenes, which is on this one, it's going to be a big part of this pilot. So the 60 pages is going to really. Those premise scenes are going to be either 12 to 15 all the way up to sort of 35. So there are 2 acts in the middle, the Act 2 and Act 3. Remember, Act 2 is the movie, or is the show, as we say. So you really need to focus on delivering the things that you've promised within those 2 acts right in the middle, and make sure that we're having all the fun and games that were suggested by the premise and using the premise to its full potential, at least within the scope of the pilot. So yeah, you can see where all those things fall here, and we'll have this presentation linked in the chat if you need to refer back to either of these in the future. And notice also Act 5 is just like entirely finale, usually. Here's a breakdown of those beats. It's the same sort of stuff, but just look how we have more acts, so we have to have more beats here in our initial outlines. So let's go through just what we're doing in each of these moments a little more. Let me see. Do I have slides for each one, or is this just the? Okay. So let's start with intro. We set up the normal worlds. We learn kind of what is missing in the main character's life. If there's something that they are like, if it's a premise-based show, often that the story that is to follow is to be the character trying to get something that they want. Whether that's, I want to escape from prison, or I want to get off this island, or it might be as simple as that. It might be, I want to be powerful. I want to rise through the ranks of my job. I want to, so look at what is the sort of internal need of your character that's going to be fueling everything that is to follow. That's the sort of what is missing. We also like to see the world sort of operating as intended. So if you're going to be building out a world that's completely different than ours, you usually can't start poking holes in it right away. Let's think of, I don't know, in the movie Minority Report, for instance, the main character is the top cop at an agency that uses psychics to predict crime before the crime happens. There's a TV show of Minority Report as well. I don't know actually if it works the same way or not. I think it does. But the point is that we start out with the main character being the sort of poster boy for that system. We watch that system working as intended. In the first scene, he's not like, but what are the implications of this? How could this go wrong? We need to, in fact, see that system working as intended before we can start to kind of deconstruct it or poke holes in it or realize the flaws in it, because the journey is going to be the main character realizing the flaws in that system along with the audience. So make sure to show, especially if you have some secondary world, show the world working as it always does. But it still needs to be in an exciting and interesting way. So we also want to just nail down, what does the main character want? A character needs to be motivated to do something. And even if the show is just them doing their job, then it should be someone who cares about their job. Very few people want to watch a show about a person, whether they're competent or not, who is hating what they do or doesn't care about what they do. Characters not caring about things is kind of a death sentence, and a character not caring is just inherently undramatic for the most part, unless them not caring about their job, for instance, is a huge point of conflict that causes dramatic problems within that story. So the story has to be kind of about that, if that's the case, but make sure they want something, even if what they want is just to bring the criminals to justice because they really care about this job. So your main character is often in a sort of kind of stasis here. I wouldn't worry way too much about the idea of stasis in status quo shows, especially because those kinds of shows are about people who don't really change that much. Sitcoms, characters may change very gradually over the course of seasons, but for the most part, we're trying to play similar games in the same toolbox every single week. So, toy box every single week. So, don't worry too much about the overall journey of the character for now. We mostly just want to focus on what is their journey within the pilot, which should be a smaller change than it would be in a movie for the most part. There's exceptions to that. The catalyst is going to be the thing that sets the events of the show or movie in motion, forces the main character out of their stasis. And again, if this is a premise show, which is going to be about a bigger character change, then yes, this can absolutely be about the character breaking away from who they were before, and now they realize that they sort of need to become someone new. You can take a show like Ozark, for instance, which is about a financial advisor, financial guy who, or stock investment advisor who ends up having to enter the world of organized crime and money laundering. So we're going to set him off on this much longer journey, but we're just going to see the first part of it here, the first chapter in like a 5 or 6 chapter series. You're going to push us towards the premise with this catalyst, with some kind of call to adventure to show that something has changed and this doorway has been unveiled to them, a doorway that might offer something interesting to them on the other side. And that might be as simple as a crime that I have to solve, or a monster I have to fight. And I always fight monsters. I always solve crimes. That's my thing. In which case, this isn't going to represent a huge change for them. This is going to be more us watching someone do what they always do. If this is going to be that much bigger journey, then often this will be a more impactful change. A character, starting a family, getting a new job, going to a new place of some kind. So trying the locks is going to represent what is so difficult, what is going to be difficult about this upcoming journey, and how is your hero going to be tested to see if they're kind of ready for it. So it's often going to be a place where we're going to be learning the rules of the world, trying to break through this door, but perhaps in the wrong way, and just realizing the limitations that we're going to be struggling with over the course of this. So trying the locks is just like sometimes called the debate section of a story. I like to call it this at this point just to differentiate, to separate it from the idea of people just standing around and talking about, should I go on this journey or shouldn't I? Should I do the movie or should I do the quest or shouldn't I? When that can in fact be part of it, but it's only one part of it. Like, also, we have to have, we like to watch this be active. We like to watch your character actually maybe perhaps take a few tentative first few steps on this journey and start to realize what the pitfalls will be. And even if this is just, the catalyst is the character gets the job, and the trying the lock section might be they're driving on the way to the murder scene or whatever, and they're reading the file, and they're like, wow, this is going to be my toughest one yet, or this is going to be particularly difficult. Am I sure I want to take this one? So your character might have some hesitance or some refusal of the call before they actually step through into the second world, whatever the upside down, topsy-turvy world of the second act, or the middle part of the story is going to be. And if this is, like, for instance, a superhero show, catalyst is often someone gets powers, trying the locks is them try to figure out how to use the powers, causing various mischief along the way. Break into 2. Your protagonist chooses to go on the journey of this show or movie. From here, there's no going back, and you want to make sure that you're moving us into Act 2 with energy and momentum. And remember, there's going to be a commercial break here, and it's really essential that we give the audience something that they must return from after the break. That they would feel silly if they missed it, because they're like, I have to see how that plays out. So, premise scenes are going to be that section of the story to really cut loose and go nuts and use those moments that you envisioned in the trailer or perhaps on the poster. If there's a guy on the trailer, on the poster with a gun standing over a bunch of dead aliens, this is where we want to see your main character fighting a bunch of aliens. If this is a woman who is standing in front, or like, let's imagine the poster would be ladies on a cooking show. It's about a lady who starts a brand new cooking show. This is probably where we want to see her getting that show up and running. So this is the primary action. Act 2 is the story. So have fun here. Give us what you promised and make it seem like, oh, I'm in good hands of a storyteller who knows what they have promised and is kind of delivering it to me in a way that I didn't quite expect, but it's the sort of thing that I did expect. Midpoint is often an act break that escalates the stakes, escalates the danger. Sometimes there's a big reversal or twist here. That can be a nice, like, cliffhanger often where it seems like, I don't know, we in crime procedural TV shows, sometimes they'll do this thing where it's like, up until the midpoint, we'll be chasing the bad guy and we actually get him and we pull the mask off and we're like, we got him. And then we realize, wait, it couldn't have been this guy. Then who is the killer? So it's going to leave us on this question of, oh, it seems like we succeeded at first, but in fact, we did not resolve the problem and it's only going to get more difficult from here out. So big cliffhanger here. Your main character just sort of realizes the enormity of the task in front of them. So once we come back from that, then we are right into escalation, which says, oh no, the fun is over. We start to realize the consequences of the midpoint. So if we got the wrong bad guy first, now the characters are in legal trouble for arresting the wrong dude, and the killer's still out there. So the antagonist also strikes again or moves in and regroups and tightens their grasp in whatever way. All is lost when things seem like they could not possibly get worse, and it's the worst consequence that your protagonist can possibly imagine, which might be they fail, or it seems like they are on the verge of failing. And in stories with a strong central relationship, often this is a breakup or parting of ways, and in TV, it's not always going to be like, if there's a strong central couple in the show, they don't have to break up in the pilot, but it might be, a fight between them, a disagreement between them, just a separation of your character from the person that has been anchoring them down to earth the most. And even partners might have to split up temporarily, like, cop partners or anything, might have to split up for whatever reason just because they can't agree on how to accomplish their goal, or they've taken too high of a toll or of a cost from the initial steps in the journey or anything like that. So this always lost moment. Look at what matters to the character the most and hit them there. And then that's followed by this pit of despair where things in fact do get even worse. It's the worst possible outcome that you can imagine as the writer. And this is where, for instance, the killer not only is still at large, but they move in and they kidnap the main character's kid. Something even worse. And this can be a character dies or is gravely injured. It doesn't have to be, but, that's just an easy shortcut to find the thing the character cares about the most and make sure it is in direct jeopardy. Break into 3 is going to be a breakthrough, reconciliation, apology, or kind of a lock and load. The protagonist finds or remembers or realizes something useful that they've learned over the course of the story so far, and is going to choose to take one more desperate sort of swing at the bad guys. This is going to be like that one clue that we now remember. We now sort of see how it connects with whatever the other clues are that we've learned so far, and it allows the characters to realize, oh crap, I know where the kidnapper is. He's at the aquarium. So now we have to rush there and go get him, because remember, this has to be something that only could have happened because of this journey that we went on. We could not have made this choice and experienced this moment if it were not for the events of the preceding story. So the story has been leading up to this. The finale is going to be that big confrontation where your character will be armed with whatever new tool or self-discovery they've made. They're going to synthesize what they've learned in Act 2 with what the values they've always had in Act 1 sort of thing, and move in and take on the bad guy with everything they've got for this big, you want to crash all your action figures together, and at the end, we realize which ones are broken and which ones aren't. And the character either gets what they want or they don't. The killer gets arrested, usually. If not, then they get away. And that sort of has to be, that you have to realize if what you're doing is going to be against what the audience expects, then you have to lean into that and really make the most of that and be aware that it's not what the audience may have wanted, but you have to give them something better than what they wanted if you're doing that. So just be careful there. The stinger is going to be the sort of epilogue or a preview of what's to come next week. We may have gotten this killer, but next week, we get a report that there's an even worse killer over in Florida, so we're going to have to get over there. Or it might just be, if it's a comedy, this can just be like we've resolved all the issues by the end of the finale, and now this is just your characters hanging out, doing something funny. It doesn't actually have to be building or leading to anything. This is just, if you've built an enjoyable world with people that we want to spend time with, this is like an extra page or two to spend time with them as we watch over the credits. This is a season map. You don't need to look at this or memorize this or know how this works at all. This is just what Netflix uses for their kind of like, you can see how over the course of an entire season we have similar dramatic principles at play as we do in just a single pilot. It's the react structure. We have these plot points. You can even see the climax of Act 1 is kind of going to be like that, it's going to take the sort of place of the season's catalyst. The midpoint is going to be like a big twist right in the middle of everything, and then the climax of Act 2 is going to be, you can see over here, at like around episodes 7 or 8, and then we are going to be wrapping up towards the end of episode 8. So yeah, the final episode is going to be the one that really wraps things up. We don't want to have multiple episodes of wrap up, but again, don't worry about this because you're not writing whole seasons of TV. You're writing just a pilot, and you need to focus and spend years of your time getting exceptionally good at that before you think about anything else. Okay, common structure problems. I don't have to go over all of these, but I will just highlight a couple that come up all the time. The story begins too late is a really, really common one. It's not to say that you should start your huge explosive catalyst on page 1, but your page 1 does need to pull us in immediately and be gripping and interesting and say like, oh, okay, I am in good hands of a storyteller who will answer questions and not just leave, unlimited questions open, and we are actually tipping over that first domino via either a coincidence or a character choice of some kind, but regardless, we are getting things going. Your character is actually starting to move along the journey, and we don't want to just demonstrate how their life is ad infinitum. We don't want to just show the status quo forever and ever and ever. We got to just follow through at a certain point and try to make sure that the story doesn't get going after the first commercial break. We definitely need the catalyst. If it's not in the middle of your first act, it needs to be the end of your first act and no later. If the catalyst has not occurred by your first commercial break, no one's coming back for more. The script offers a tour of a world, but not a story. So it comes and goes without enough narrative at all. It's just more like a series of scenes and conversations that kind of demonstrate a world to us or show us parts of a world without actually focusing on, remember, a character who wants to accomplish a thing, faces obstacles in their way, needs to adjust their tactics to get at these unique tactics that only your main character would use that separates them from all other characters like that. So they're adjusting tactics to try to confront that obstacle, and at the end they either succeed or they don't. But we want to watch, like, just by watching someone attempting to get something that they want, we kind of root for them to succeed, no matter what that thing is. And so by having a character that wants something more, we will almost always be more engaged. And it's important to just give your character something that they want, and make this, like, hinge this whole journey and the whole thing that we're watching around them trying to get that thing. Even if you have other subplots going on as well, you might have an ensemble with several other of these little stories, but having that central A story spine of the narrative is going to help it prevent this from falling into this trap of offering a tour of a world. So remember, the central A story is going to be what carries us through the entire thing, regardless of how much world building you have to do. You have less to do than you think. Focus on a character wants a thing, has to face obstacles, and adjust tactics to overcome those obstacles in service of getting that thing. So, what else? Important story material is told and not shown, especially in first acts. Endless explanations of stuff, where we have characters just either talking to each other, telling each other things that they already should probably know, characters discussing exposition and backstory and conflict, or a bunch of flashbacks, off-screen material where we, even a flashback is at least showing us something, even though you don't want to over-rely on flashbacks unless that's a really elemental part of the storytelling style you're using. Think of a show like Lost, for instance, where the flashbacks are a really integral part of how it works, or if your show exists in sort of multiple timelines, which, if you're a beginner, I would not recommend trying. But remember, we're not really coming to the story for information. We're coming to this for drama. So try to not just tell us things, try to demonstrate and show us things and make us care. Rather than having, if your character wakes up in this weird futuristic prison and they meet their cellmate and they're like, what happens if we try to escape? Instead of having the cellmate say, explain to them what happens if they try to escape, well, a force field comes up and you'll be dissolved, and that's really bad, and you'll be teleported to the detention block on level C7. Why not just have the character try to escape? And then we see what happens to them. So their cellmate tries to warn them, hey, wait, don't, and then the force field comes down and teleports them down to room C7, or it happens to someone else, and we get to see the effect of it rather than having to rely on someone telling us what would happen. So try to show and not tell. Obviously, it's the most corny, cliched writing advice ever at this point, but that's what it kind of means. We want to see the effect of things. We don't want to hear your characters just talking about stuff. Protagonist is too passive, as in the story is happening to them, and it might even be interesting things that are happening to them, but it might feel like they're not really in the driver's seat of the story. They're not making choices that push the story forward, and after the catalyst, the story needs to be driven primarily by your protagonist and their efforts and their tactics and their adjustments and tactics to overcome the obstacles that they need to hurdle in order to reach their goal. So it's that sort of simple. We don't want to have the story doesn't happen to your character. Your character kind of happens to the world in such a way that creates that story. The plot doesn't escalate. So remember, the events and the obstacles that your character is facing need to be increasing in difficulty as the story goes on, and almost never should they be decreasing in difficulty. Or if they do, then some other obstacle needs to be ramping up instead. Because we like to watch someone struggle against something. We like to watch a character who wants something very badly struggle to get that by going up with formidable forces. If the antagonistic force is not that formidable, it's going to feel just like a saggy, lazy kind of show, wherein we're not that engaged because it feels like they don't have to do that much to actually overcome this thing. So watch your time clocks, like any kind of ticking clocks that you've set up. You may not have enough if it's feeling like your story is lacking urgency and lacking motivation. There may not be enough pressure on the main character to move forward. So that's how you can think of how I can maybe address this passive character problem and this escalation problem. More common problems. Flat, talky opening comes up all the time. Two characters stand around and just talk about exposition, or they say, as you know this, as you know that, or just go about their business, or we do too much of just boring everyday life. I know I mentioned we do want to show the world working as intended, but you can still be finding those. Character wants a goal and has an obstacle that come up and needs to use tactics to accomplish that thing in every single scene, even the ones that are just the character living their normal life. So don't just show up in the character's live in page 1 and just start sort of following them around like a documentary crew. We need to have a hook. We need to be drawn into the story and say, oh, that's interesting. I need to see how someone would possibly resolve that problem. Or what is even going, like, our question might even be at the beginning of certain shows, what is even going on here? But it needs to be a clear and compelling enough presentation of that question, what is going on here, that we're grounded in the world, we know who your character basically is, we know what they're basically trying to do for the most part, and then you can start to complicate and bring in the kind of, weirdness of whatever kind. So hook us in the first couple pages. Like, you're not going to get readers getting past page 3 if they aren't hooked by page 3. So start with something interesting and exciting. Don't start with a flat and talky opening. What else? A lot of these things are things to worry about after you've written a bunch of pilots, like by the numbers execution. You should learn how to do a by the numbers execution before you should worry so much about, is my script too by the numbers or too samey or too much like something else? Does my script not know what story it wants to tell? That might come up things along those lines of it. You kind of drift too far from the original idea, or the ideas are too diffuse, or any of these other things. But really, you just have to kind of get used to writing and finishing things before you need to worry about, did I accomplish every single thing to the highest possible level? So mostly you should worry about these things to begin with. 1, protagonist too passive. 2, we don't escalate. 3, the story does not get going early enough. And 4, don't start with flat, talky openings. Hook us in early. Those are the things that students, for the most part, need to be focusing on. Don't worry as much about, does the message overshadow the story? You need to just write and finish and execute things and move on to the next thing before you can start to worry about those things. Do watch out for too many coincidences, though. Those are coincidences that create problems are good, but coincidences and that solve problems usually feel like cheating, so just be careful with that. Okay, I've shared these before, so I'm not going to bring this up at the moment, but for members in the Discord, we do have examples of some of my outlines that I've used before and just how I organize this process, so we should know what this kind of looks like at the very least. This is going to be a list of usually bolded bullet points that have each of these structural beats on them. So remember, intro, catalyst, all these things. And then underneath it, you have a list of the events that comprise that moment. Some of those moments are going to be just one single card. A catalyst should not be a series of events. A catalyst is just one thing that happens. Don't have a bunch of things underneath catalyst. It's one card, or it's one, bullet point. What else? Act breaks are just one bullet point. Just one thing that happens that punctuates the end of that act. It can't be multiple things. Premise scenes, that's a bunch of bullet points. That's probably going to be your biggest section. Midpoint is just one thing. So you got to just kind of get used to looking at outlines and reading through outlines and making outlines in order to really learn this. But the main points here are, remember, catalyst and act breaks are just one thing. Okay, so we have some examples of exercises here that I'm not going to do just now, but let me just double check. Do the students here understand how to quickly come up with the story beats? Do you understand all these story beats and have any questions on everything that's going to be going into the pilot? Do you understand what the document is that you're going to be making for next week?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
We can end the pilot and the bit of despair, or we need the break into 3 and final?
Sorry, can you ask that again? What was the question?
I mean, in the pilot, we can end it with the pit of despair?
No. You have to. No, you can't end with the pit of despair. That would be. We got to end with the stinger. So let me bring up the really big overview of the structure.
I mean, they have to resolve the pit of despair in that episode.
Yeah, we have to do all of this in the pilot episode. So, like, this sort of pit of despair is going to be what comes before the break into Act 3, which is going to be, like, the big climax and finale, the final showdown of whatever kind. So, yeah, we can't end before the final showdown. That would just feel like you chopped it off, and it would just feel incomplete.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just, I don't know. I mean, for the cliffhanger, how can... So you fix things and then you messed up again?
Sorry, I don't understand the question. Can you ask again?
I mean, I understand that you have to fix everything after the bit of despair. So when you fix it, it's not like how can you have another cliffhanger after that?
There doesn't have to be another cliffhanger after if you finish. So let's look at the broad overview right here. So if your pit of despair is going to end with a cliffhanger, then we return after the commercial break to do the final showdown or the final battle or whatever, and then we conclude that. You don't have to end the show on another cliffhanger. I mean, you can if it's going to be like you have to come back next week for the next episode to see how this resolves. But for the most part, you should focus on telling a beginning, middle, and end story in the pilot, because you're not going to get more episodes. So, like, don't worry about another cliffhanger after the finale.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, I hope that answers that question. Any other questions about structure? No more questions?
What is a stinger? When you were explaining that, your voice shut out for a while, so I didn't hear about it.
Oh, it did?
Yeah.
Okay, you can let me know when that happens too, because I can't tell if that's the case. So please inform me if that is the case. So a stinger is what either is going to play after the credits or during the credits. And in a comedy show, this is usually just going to be us spending a little more time with the characters, doing like one funny thing with the people that we've gotten to know. The stinger in a premise-based show is going to be a preview of what would be happening next week. So this is going to be showing what is the next villain that we're going to have to deal with. How is the story not yet resolved fully? It's going to be like a preview of something to come.
Like in Peacemaker? Something like that?
I have not seen that, so I couldn't tell you.
Okay, I won't say any spoilers.
Okay, but yeah, so in a show that is premise-based and has a lot of story to tell, this is going to be a preview of the thing that's coming next week.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Hope that answers all your questions. So I'm getting a lot of background noise from a mic in the chat. If we can, I might have to just mute darkness here for a second. Okay, so let's look at last things here. We're not going to do these exercises for now because I think we need to just focus on student loglines and maybe even sketchbooks today. So it's good to early on come up with these premise scenes for your pilot, which is going to be the stuff in the second act. That is the stuff that would be in the trailer, the stuff that would be on the poster. We need to know what we're kind of building to and what the meat of the story is going to be before you can actually start figuring out how you would need to introduce us to that or how you would resolve the consequences of that. So for next week, we're going to have a complete story beats summary, and as always, be reading at least one complete pilot script and be ready to talk about it, because I will be asking questions. What did you learn? What did you like? What did you not like in that pilot itself? So, TV pilot bootcamp schedule is going to look like this again. Remember, next week will be scene cards. That would be a full paragraph for every single scene in the pilot. And you need to know what happens on every page of the story before we begin on Act 4, on week 4, which is April 10th. Wherein we're going to write the first 10 to 20 pages. Week 5 will be next 10 to 20 pages, and week 6 will be that completing the third act, ultimately finishing the draft by May 1st. Okay, if you are not enrolled yet, you can purchase the course on its own at scriptcamp.net/classes, or you can start a free trial of unlimited membership, which gives you access to all of our boot camps and classes, playwriting, rewrites, workshops, guest lectures, and feature and TV. Of course, scriptcamp.net/membership. Here's all the benefits of membership. It also includes access to the video library where you can watch recordings just like this and any of the other classes and courses, all recorded, all accessible in the video library to members. So that's over 60 hours of classes per month, along with private Discord channels. And also we have this coaching option, which slots are currently closed for, but we will let you know if more become open there. That includes a monthly script review by me. And here's some options for coverage as well if you want to take a look at that. But remember, if you are a member, send Nacho, our co-founder, a message with your size and mailing address, and you will get a Script Camp t-shirt. We have a bunch of these in different sizes. Also, Lab is going to be Saturdays from 4 to 6, where you can come for one-on-one help with scenes, outlines, questions, topics you just want to hear more about. Any individual help that you need. Maybe you need explanations of some elements of structure that you're not clear on yet, or just anything at all. It's like office hours. You can come by with any questions. So remember, Saturdays 4 to 6 Pacific time for intensive script development sessions with either me or another one of our pro guests. Referral program. If you refer a friend, They will get discounted membership, and you get a free month. You can do that as many times as you want. If you have 12 friends you refer, you will get a whole year free, for instance. All right, so we're going to go to the chat and just make sure that the students here are on track. Oh, that's okay, Darkness. I'll take the mute off if you can mute it yourself. There you go. You got it. Okay. So let's look at some loglines and sketchbooks if you guys want to share, just to make sure everyone's on track. So it looks like we have logline from Erlanda. Can you read this out for us? This is Black Book.
Sure. Black terminates premise. A demonic woman from the future escapes from prison and enters the human world, knowing her long-lost mother when she meets her father. I wrote some explanation. Her father is a demon who recruits the worst souls to hell. When he sees this kind and sweet woman at a robbery, gets hooked with her. He recruits her, and she becomes a succubus and loses her memory. That's why the protagonist thinks she got abandoned and hates her father for putting her on prison.
Okay, I'm going to have to read this back to make sure I understand. So this is called Black Book, a 30-minute premise show. What is the genre?
Action and fantasy.
Action fantasy. Okay, so 30-minute action fantasy show. That to me suggests it would probably be animated, but it doesn't have to be. So let's look at the beats of this so we can start to imagine what those would look like. All right. A demonic woman from the future escapes from prison and enters the human world, knowing her long-lost mother when she meets her father? I don't understand this at all. Can you, like, what is the character trying to do?
She's trying to kill her father.
She's trying to kill her father? Why don't you say that in the logline? That's like that's huge. That's like the whole point of the show. So like, just saying she enters the human world knowing her long lost mother when she meets her father. I can't understand that as a character goal at all. That's just kind of like facts about the character. It's already complicated world building for a half-hour show. She's a demon from the future who also from a different world. So you're saying there's sort of like three main things you're setting up there. So the world building already seems complicated to me. That she escapes from prison and enters the human world to find and kill her father, I guess is what you're saying. And maybe along the way meets up with her long-lost mother or starts living with her.
Well, yeah, she escapes from prison without knowing that she's going to enter the human world. And now that she's in, she wants to kill her father because he put her in prison. But she doesn't know that she's gonna meet her mother.
She doesn't know that she's gonna meet her mother. So, like, what does that mean, meet her mother? Start living with her mother? Like, have to partner up with her mother somehow?
I mean, she doesn't know her. She never met her.
She doesn't. So I don't understand. I can't understand this. So I'm gonna read the next paragraph that you said. Her father is a demon who recruits the worst souls to hell. When he sees this kind and sweet woman at a robbery, he gets hooked with her. What does "gets hooked with her" mean?
He likes her. I mean.
So he falls in love with her.
Something like that. Yeah.
Okay, gets hooked with her is not an English phrase. I have no idea what that means.
Sorry.
That's okay. So he recruits her, and she becomes a succubus and loses her memory. That's why the protagonist thinks she got abandoned. Why would she think? Okay, so this is backstory? Or does this happen in the pilot?
I just trying to explain it because I know my English is not too fluent, so I try to explain why it's happening.
Right, but so is this backstory, or does this happen in the pilot?
Actually, in the pilot, her parents fall in love, and he regrets her mother, but we don't know yet about mother's destiny.
Okay, so this does happen in the pilot. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
It does. All right. He recruits her, and she becomes a succubus and loses her memory. That's why the protagonist thinks she got abandoned and hates her father for putting her in prison. Okay. Why is she in prison?
In the future, her father puts her in because, well, she thinks he hates her, but actually it was her grandfather that doesn't like that she's half human.
Okay, so she's in prison for being for being half human, half human. Okay. And that's illegal in the demon world. I see. Okay. So this is there's interesting stuff here. This feels way more complicated than a half-hour pilot to me, though. This feels like it would need to be at least an hour, especially with all you're saying that we don't even meet the protagonist isn't even born until the end of the first act.
No, I think the first act is when she's in prison because she's trying to escape. She doesn't know that she's going to the human world.
But you said that we're actually watching this robbery happen. The father falls in love with the mother. He has the daughter. You said that all happens in the pilot, right?
Yeah, but she watched all the stuff. When she enters the human world, then she sees her mother at the robbery.
When she enters the human world, she goes back in time?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So we have a no time travel rule in Script Camp for a reason.
No. Yeah, but it's not about time travel. It's just like she's in another dimension, and when she escapes, she enters this gate, and it's not any explanation or paradox. It's just she's in the human world, and there's no time for her, and she sees everything in that time.
So she ends up witnessing her own parents meet?
Yeah.
So there is time travel. Or maybe you're saying she just has like a vision of it happening or something, or like doesn't. This is so many elements here. You have so many different types of fantasy and sci-fi. You have time travel, demon worlds. You have like rules revolving around how demons can imprison people or bring them from one world to another. Like, this is all in a half-hour show. That's just like an immense amount of stuff that you're gonna have to like cram in here and explain. And this just reading is too complicated to me. I would either consider making this an hour long, or consider simplifying this so that it just doesn't feel like we have to explain so much stuff. And I think you could easily do either one. I'm also just wondering what we're actually doing in the show. So this all feels like backstory to me. What are we actually, your main character in the pilot, what are we mostly watching her do? Like, what would be in Act 2?
She tries to kill him, her father, even if she risks she being born.
See, there's more time travel elements here. She's trying to kill her own father, even though that might make it so that she's never born?
Yeah, she hates her. She hates him that much.
Okay. It's a bit of a strange goal. I mean, her goal will result in her own death. I would maybe see if you can find a way to do this without the time travel element. I mean, why even have that? It just feels like we're adding like layer upon layer upon layer of narrative complexity to this in a story that seems to be about a demon woman trying to kill her father, which at that simple level is compelling and is something you could pull off in a half hour. Once we have to start worrying about like the time stream and the paradoxes and the like, it just feels like way too much. So I hope you can maybe like find a way to take that just core element, half demon woman escapes from prison and now is going to try to kill her father who put her there. That's cool, and that sounds like a better logline to me, something just like that. I don't think that even comes up in the logline that you have here, which is just mostly you're using most of your words to have to explain the world. From the demon world from the future escapes from prison and enters the human world to kill her father who put her there. Would probably be where you want that pilot logline to end. As far as the series logline goes, it can be a bit broader, and it can suggest, like, okay, might be a conflict that will take multiple seasons. I'm going to guess you're saying if that's what the whole show is going to be, she does not succeed at killing her father at the end of the pilot. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. But it can still be her goal. Like, so in the pilot logline, you can say that's her goal. In the series, that can also be sort of the goal of the broader series, but we should probably understand why that's going to be something so difficult that it's going to take, multiple episodes to do. Okay, so I hope that helps a little bit, just in terms of, like, you got to cut stuff away from this. Remember, like, even a movie is kind of like a short story. An hour-long TV episode is like a shorter story, and a half-hour TV episode, you get like 12 scenes. That's like 4 scenes per act. So if you can start, like, listing out what would those 12 scenes be, you only have you have very little space to work with, and you have to be so efficient and like, you have to get right to the point and make it so clear. Even if this was a purely realistic world that didn't have all these different species and all these different rules and all this time travel, dimensional travel, prison escape, like, that is just a lot to have to deal with. Remember, even a pilot about a guy who gets a job as a mailman, you'd have to, like, be pretty careful about which scenes you choose. So I guess just, like, try to reduce the complexity of this however you can.
It is very helpful.
Sure. Any questions on that?
Can I manage maybe without the time travel, but with a flashback, and maybe tell some of the story to get sense, to make sense?
You can use flashbacks. You want to avoid doing so when you can. Like, for the most part, we like to see things happening in the present timeline. That said, there's all kinds of ways you can use flashbacks to various effects. So yeah, you can definitely still do that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Darkness, do you have a pilot that you have worked out anything from that you'd like to share as we move into week 2?
Not as of yet right now.
Okay, any just, like, broader ideas that you want to talk about, or do you want to just observe for now? Because we're almost at the end of class, so we will be, like, cutting off pretty soon, but we have, like, up to another half hour if you want to just talk about ideas.
Not necessarily. I'm working on a scene, but, like, I'm not exactly sure, like, too much how I want to frame it all the way just yet. It's not a very long scene. It's pretty it's relatively short for right now from what the idea that I have in my head. But I was in writer's lab the other day, and I was writing it, and I don't know, like, it's going pretty good, but I don't really know, like, I don't really have anything that I want to, like, bring up that I need pointers on right now.
Okay, I mean, do you want to be in this pilot program and try to finish a pilot in the next 5 weeks, or are you just trying to just check out the class? Oh, you are? Okay, so
yeah.
Is the scene for a pilot?
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
Well, wait, like, the pilot is like a small, like, a 30-minute thing, right?
Well, a pilot can be half hour or a full hour. It's like the first episode of a theoretical TV show.
Okay. Oh, actually, I was talking about a movie that I'm, like, currently working on, but I'm also working on a show too. But I do have an idea for a pilot. So, like, the only thing is I don't have the script on me. I wrote it in my notebook, and it's like I don't have it on me right now.
That's okay. I mean, do you want to just spitball and just, like, talk about the basics of the idea and see if it's something you can work into either half hour or hour long format?
Yeah, so basically, the show, or like the pilot, is basically a woman and her partner that are working on inventing the couch. So this basically takes place in a very far future where, couches, like, don't exist anymore. And, like, like, they're reinventing the couch and everything, and they're, like, trying to find a name for it. It's actually like a serious kind of humorous kind of show.
Okay.
And yeah, like, when it's created, they invite some people in to, like, test it out at first. And it goes from, like, a serious kind of feeling to, pretty laid back and hilarious because like there's weed involved and all kinds of stuff.
Is this like a sort of post-apocalyptic world?
I don't know. I didn't think about it being a post-apocalyptic world because, like, in my mind, it's just something like couches were just they just ceased to exist at one point, and I don't know. It's like Blockbuster, like that went out of business, and so like somewhere near in the future, like something like that might pop up again. If there's no like memory or like evidence of it ever having existed in the past.
Right. I mean, the idea of a show about people sort of reinventing and having to remarket the couch is very funny and unique. I'm just wondering how it makes sense because, like, unless there's some sort of nuclear devastation wherein all of civilization is wiped out, then are people still sitting on stuff? Like, if they're not still sitting on stuff, then there's got to be some kind of reason why this has sort of happened, and that's going to kind of dictate, or that's going to affect the logic of the rest of the show. Like you mentioned, Blockbuster ceased to exist because people started streaming their movies online or using Netflix DVDs, right? So if couches went away, did they come up? Is there some better thing that people now relax on, or is the concept of relaxing no longer around?
Okay, that's a good question, and actually, I think I might incorporate that in there because I didn't think about that, and you're right. There does have to be a point as to why there's a reinventation of a couch. And to be realistic, I think I'm gonna go with, like maybe they just decided to go with something more advanced to sit on. But there's like some complications, and it's like, oh man, like, I wish I could just like sit on something that's on the floor or something, because it's like a lot of the stuff that they have now levitates, let's say, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, I guess you'll just need to sort of work out what is the need that they're sort of addressing, because if people have something that's better than a couch, why would they go back? Excuse me. And I think your characters might have their own sort of logic or argument for that. But
yeah, they definitely do.
and I guess my other question would be the whole, imagine like a pilot's supposed to be, unless it's a miniseries or unless it's a limited series, it's supposed to be like multiple seasons of TV, right? That's like potentially up to 10 hours. So is this going to be multiple seasons about people trying to invent and market a couch? Or is it going to be like where they're reinventing all kinds of things from our current timeline that no longer exist?
Well, I didn't think about that either. I'm not too sure yet. But what I do know is that, the arc of, these two partners creating a couch, it is going to have a line, like a storyline within the series, and the other seasons about like things that are being reinvented or newly invented. And like really the show is about, like this guy and, like I don't know, like I had to think a little bit more into it because, like I have this great idea, but like I haven't solidified it as of completely just yet.
Okay.
So I will definitely, like next week I will definitely give you a proper answer because, you're helping me think about these things.
Okay, great. And if you didn't watch the if you weren't here for the intro class, there's a recording. It's on YouTube, so you can go back and watch last week's class to get sort of like the just step by step what to do to get the log line in place and to get the foundation of the idea in place, which is going to be two separate log lines. There's a series one, and then there's the pilot one. So the series one might be something like, in the future after, I don't know, relaxation becomes illegal, two lazy stoners decide to, reinvent things from our world. It might be something like that. And then the pilot log line would be like, when she runs out of rent money, it's going to be, like the smaller scale version of what just happened in that pilot. When she runs out of rent money, Jessica gets the idea, I'm going to reinvent and remarket the couch. So you got to have those two separate log lines, and our previous video goes into a lot into like how to actually make those. So I'd refer back to that. And then for next week, try to, if you can, you can rewatch the video of this class too. This is also going on YouTube, and this goes way into structure. So try to just like get the basic order of events in place, because next week we're going to be working on scene cards, which is like a full paragraph for every single scene.
Okay, gotcha. I definitely
Cool. I'm interested in the idea, though. Very unique and sounds funny.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thanks, Darkness. And yeah, refer to our anyone who's watching this as well can refer to last week's recording, which is also on the same YouTube channel. And you can find a big, long explanation of log lines and just getting the foundations of an idea into place. Okay, so we're going to wrap here for today. And let's look at what's coming next at Script Camp. Well, we have, obviously, here's the the schedule for what's coming up in this class. Remember, we have table reads on Sundays, so that's today. Bring up to 5 pages of a script to hear it read with other students and get feedback on it. And on Fridays, that's when we have feature class. And Saturdays, we have, in order, one right after the other, starting at noon Pacific time, we have rewrite class, followed by playwriting with Morgan Smalley, and then followed by lab from 4 to 6. So our weekends are pretty packed with classes, so there's always going to be something to do. Make sure to check scriptcamp.net for the calendar and a full look at everything that's coming up. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Remember, for next week, fill out your structure, your story beats outline, and refer back to this presentation if you need to look at what those points are, if you need them re-explained. And remember to come to lab the upcoming Saturday if you have any questions before finalizing what that structure is going to look like. All right, thanks so much for coming, everyone. We will see you all around Script Camp. Hope to see you soon. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.